Well, hello, friends, and thank you so much for taking the time to push play and for tuning in to SGT Report once again. I was sick last weekend, and nobody can attest to that better than Harley Schlanger, my friend and the national spokesperson for the LaRouchePAC organization. Harley's on the line, and Harley, how are you?
I'm fine. It sounds like you're better, Sean.
Yeah, when we spoke last Saturday, I that was between vomiting, and you were kind enough to let me off the hook, and we were able to reschedule. So that's why we haven't heard from anybody on SGT Report for the last week and a half or so, and that's my fault. But Harley, thanks so much for taking the time to join us as we close out 2013 and ring in 2014.
Well, this is going to be an interesting year because you have the midterm elections coming up, and the question will be, will Wall Street be able to keep their grip on the jugular of both political parties? And that's been the problem. And whatever else people think, budget deficits, spending caps, all these other things, the reality is that Wall Street is calling the shots. And by Wall Street, I mean 6 banks in the United States and maybe 12 to 16 internationally. And this is the year where the American people are either going to break that control or we're going to have a horrible year.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk to you about 2014, and I do want to wish everybody a very Merry Christmas. I hope everybody had a safe, blessed Merry Christmas, and I wish everybody a happy 2014, and I think what we should do is review 2013. I want to review Obama's litany of crimes with you, Harley, and I want to look forward to what, God willing, will be a peaceful and prosperous new year, rooted in liberty and a return to the rule of law. Unfortunately, you know, what you're saying about the banks couldn't be more true, and half of the people in this nation live in economic insecurity every day. I was watching a piece from Journeyman Pictures today in which they cited that fact, and it's really mind-blowing. The Federal Reserve rules the roost. We've turned over all of our power and sovereignty to a group of private bankers who have destroyed our currency and made life a living hell for more than half of the American population, Harley. Now, I'm not sure how we win that back when the man sitting in the White House is a rogue element of these banksters, and maybe worse. Maybe he's a rogue element of the Saudis. I know that you guys have been reporting on that. You want the secret documents from 9/11, citing the ties to the Saudi government and their involvement in 9/11. You want those secret pages of the 9/11 report released. We have so much to talk about. Should we revisit Obama's crimes in 2012 and 2013 before we begin?
Sure, we can do that very quickly. I mean, we've had several developments this year, which again point to the fact that this is an impeachable president. I think the biggest crime is that the Republican Party has refused to move on impeachment because they say, well, the Democrats control the Senate. There are 15 Senate Democrats that are right now trying to decide whether they're going to continue any support for Obama or break with him. And what we should do is have an American political commitment to save the nation above party. Because when you talk about Obama, look, we saw the horrendous opening of Obamacare, but it's really not about the computer. It's about the fact that people are being forced by law to buy private insurance, which is really a bailout of the insurance companies. And some of the big insurance companies are right there with the too big to fail banks and controlling things. So on the basis of Obamacare itself, he should be impeached. He's looting the American people to bail out insurance companies. Secondly, the Volcker rule. This is one of the biggest frauds that's ever come down the pike, and it's part of this Dodd-Frank policy, which is basically written by the bankers to protect the swindles, to protect the collateralized debt obligations and the credit default swaps. And here you have a president who's claiming to have created a recovery and who's lamenting the fact that there's a growing gap between rich and poor. Well, he's created that. I mean, Bush, everyone knows that Bush was ruling on behalf of these banks, but there's still people who are deluded to think that Obama is on their side. He's not. So on those two questions, on economics, on the destruction of the healthcare sector of this country, and the imposition through insurance companies' control over government of the Obamacare, that's an impeachable offense.
Yeah.
Is defense of banks over people. And then there's still, as you mentioned, the Saudi question, the whole issue of Benghazi and the implications of Obama's bringing us to the almost to the brink of war with Russia over his stupid red line on alleged Syrian use of chemical weapons, we were really saved from what could have been a World War III by the U.S. military, especially General Martin Dempsey of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and by Putin of Russia.
Mm-hmm.
Except for those two forces, we could have been in World War III. And for whose benefit? Do the American people have a side we should be choosing in Syria or Egypt? I mean, Obama's choosing the wrong side. He's going with Al Qaeda.
On that point, Harley, as it relates to Egypt, there have been criminal terrorism charges filed against Obama in Egypt in the International Criminal Court because of his ties to his half-brother Malik Obama for managing funds for a terrorist group in Sudan. You know, I've often said to friends and family and colleagues, if Tom Clancy wrote a book that outlined all the crimes of this administration and this president, it would not be believable. People would think that's not believable. People would throw off a president like that if he were truly that corrupt and that evil. So let's quickly just go down the list from the top of my mind that I wrote down before this call. The Benghazi massacre, Fast and Furious gun running, the UN arms treaty push, the secret TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement,
Exactly.
the criminal terrorism charges filed against him in Egypt, firing military generals without grounds or explanation, Obamacare, the fascist fraud, which you cited. Look, I was listening to a 3-hour interview Dave Hodges did with Dr. Jim Gallo, a 40-year CIA veteran, and the subject of the arrest of Barack Obama came up. And they were talking about who would do the arrest. Would the military get involved? Would the Secret Service stand down? Apparently the Secret Service hates the Obamas because they're frauds and because of the way they treat their staff. Does this kind of talk surprise you, Harley, or is it just long overdue?
Oh, it doesn't surprise me. The problem is talk doesn't get you anywhere. We've got to have a support operation in the population so that some of the political leaders who know better would move. Look, the military, in a sense, pulled a soft coup. That some of them call it a soft coup by stopping Obama from bombing Syria. This was, General Dempsey went to Obama the morning that Obama was planning on launching the strike and said, well, we can do what you're asking, but it's not going to go the way you think. And if you don't want to be stuck out there hanging out with an unacceptable situation, you'd better go to the Congress. And that opened the door for the American people to be heard. This is an important point. When people say you can't get rid of Obama, you have the problem of the Democrats in the Senate and so on. Look, the majority of the population that spoke out on Syria spoke against Obama.
That's right.
Similarly with Egypt. Now, similarly, the majority of the population hates the continuing bailouts, the quantitative easing. Trillions for Wall Street and nothing for Main Street. Most Americans who are aware of the role of the Federal Reserve want to get rid of it. But the problem is that the stupefaction of the population by the control of the media by these same banksters has given Obama the means to maneuver. And so people who otherwise might move against him won't do so. I don't count on the military. They're doing what they can to keep us out of war. But there's a tradition in the military of not being involved in U.S. politics.
Right.
And so it's going to depend on the people.
But let me ask you something on that Syria note, because it's so important. It's the first time in my lifetime that I have seen the collective American people stand up and say, hell no, we're not doing this, because everybody in this administration was pounding the war drums, and they weren't going to stop. John Kerry was making every excuse in the world to go and start another war in Syria, regardless of Russia standing against this country and threatening to take it to levels that would lead us to World War III. Then we saw Lindsey Graham come out and threaten that if we didn't go into Syria, Syrian terrorists could nuke South Carolina. I mean, you can't make this stuff up, Harley. Are these people that corrupt? Because that is absolutely nothing more than blackmail, in my opinion. And it's really beyond the pale that Lindsey Graham would make that threat. And then there's talk from Jim Gallo and others that the American military prevented a nuclear false flag attack. I don't know if that's true.
That's absolutely right.
Is that right?
That's absolutely right, because it wasn't just Lindsey Graham, it was the neocons from the old Bush administration, the
The
Wolfowitz crowd,
Cheney, yeah.
Rumsfeld and others. And John McCain was cheerleading Al Qaeda in Syria. So you have this insanity in the institutions, which is centered around the defense of an imperial policy of the United States backing an Anglo Saudi reorganization. And we saw actually a very interesting, I mean, the military has played a crucial role. The military is coordinating with China and Russia to avoid a confrontation which is coming up around Obama's Trans-Pacific pivot, which is directly connected to what you mentioned, this free trade zone, this free trade agreement, which would eliminate anything that's left of U.S. sovereignty. So the U.S. military has done an enormous amount to rein things in. But the problem is most people have no idea of the broader geopolitical issues. Let me just give you another example of this, Sean. What happened in Ukraine last month, and I was in Europe while this was going on, this might have stopped another confrontation that could have led to war. The Ukrainian government rejected the offer from the European Union to join the EU. And in Europe, they were going crazy over this, and Obama went crazy. George Soros is financing an opposition in Ukraine to overthrow the government. What was the issue? Why would Ukraine, which is in economic difficulty right now, join the European Union to be treated like Portugal, Greece, or Italy, where they'd have no sovereignty, they'd get no help, and they'd have to go under International Monetary Fund conditionalities? And so the other unknown aspect of this is if Ukraine would have joined the European Union, then NATO, under British and American influence, and by that I mean Obama and the Queen basically, would have turned the Ukraine into a NATO forward position on the Russian border. And the US military was warning against this as an act of war. So once again, Putin, with support from the US military, intervened, offered money to Ukraine not to join the EU. And so we've seen a real shift toward Eurasia, away from the collapsing transatlantic alliance. Now, again, Obama, I think when you brought up the Trans-Pacific Partnership, there's also a free trade agreement that's being negotiated with Europe, which was put on hold because of the NSA. We haven't mentioned this, by the way, on impeachable offense. How about the NSA? The fact that the government is still arguing that it's legitimate to tap into every phone call, every email, every Twitter, that's still a legitimate invasion of privacy.
Well, in that it will become a question for the Supreme Court because we have one federal judge, I believe Judge Leon, ruling it unconstitutional, calling it almost Orwellian, and now just I think on Friday, this fascist federal judge ruling it completely acceptable, and he called it lawful. So yeah. Now you have two judges, one apparently on the side of the people and one on the side of the fascist government, and both in disagreement over the NSA's clearly unconstitutional behavior. It's clearly unconstitutional. I mean, either we have a Fourth Amendment, either we have a First Amendment, either we have these Bill of Rights that guarantee our freedoms, or we don't, Harley.
Well, if you take away those protections, what do you have left? And the reason I brought it up is that the transatlantic free trade agreement was put on hold because the German chancellor could not in good faith continue negotiating with Obama when the administration was tapping into her cell phone.
That's right.
So you had a huge reaction in Europe. And, I've been going back and forth to Europe the whole time Obama's been in office. And for the first time, the Europeans are beginning to realize that Obama is a continuation of the degeneration of the Bush administration and not a change away from it.
That's right.
This is a big shift. And so I think the potential in 2014 is really good to have dramatic changes, provided the American people come up to snuff on intelligence matters, economic matters, and that's the big fight. And Sean, since you and I have been talking, This has always been the big issue. The fact that the media and the control of the media generally, it's not that they win people over to certain viewpoints, they just stupefy people so they don't know what the issues are. And our campaigns as a result are vacuous. The level of discussion in politics right now is absurd. Uh, you think back to the 1960 Nixon Kennedy debates, the fights in the 60s over Kennedy, in fact, beginning to move away from the Federal Reserve. You don't have anything like that. The Democratic Party used to have an anti-Wall Street grouping. There used to be an anti-Wall Street grouping in the Republican Party. It's all gone because of money. But as that value of money crashes, and then principles start to become important, we have a chance for change. But I think there are two issues here that are crucial. One is, if you accept Obama as president, then you're not going to have a country left. And we've got to get this through to both Republicans and Democrats, that this man is a cancer against this country.
Yeah. I often still see people in their cars with Obama bumper stickers, and I can't imagine a worse label one would want to put on their own personality than associating themselves with this man after all of these crimes. Because if you're going to drive around with an Obama sticker on your car at this point, then you are either literally a soulless robot or an imbecile, and it just drives me nuts. But getting back to your point about Merkel, the German chancellor, and even her recordings, her calls being recorded by the NSA, this thing has become so beastly that it's no longer just the NSA against the American people. It's the NSA, it's the elite against everybody on planet Earth. And it's crazy because these people are so out of control. Harley, you may have seen this, that the National Reconnaissance Office launched a new spy satellite called NROL-39 from Vandenberg Air Force Base in California. And its logo, and I'm taking this from our friends at Vigilant Citizen, we posted this, but the logo on the side of this rocket that launched the spy satellite is a giant octopus, Harley, over the entire planet Earth. And below it says, "Nothing is beyond our reach." These people are so out of control and evil that the only thing that I think can bring them down at this point is a complete and total collapse of the American empire. Your comments on that before I get back to George Soros? Because maybe I'm wrong. Because if maybe what they want is a collapse of the American empire, because guys like George Soros and the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers have us right where they want us, because then they're just going to roll out world government.
Well, they don't want a sovereign United States, but they will use the military force of the United States. And also, when you look at the NSA, you have to include the British Intelligence Command, because what's going on in Britain right now is that you have a high-level operation that's directly integrated with the United States, whether it's the Berlin Embassy of Great Britain, which has, I think it's the ability to tap into everything that goes on in Germany. You have similar things like that from the French, who are trying to become a junior partner in this. So you do have, whether it's world government or just a destruction of sovereignty, this is the policy. Now, the problem they have is that they don't have an alternative to stop the collapse. We saw this with Bernanke's problem of so-called tapering or not tapering, that if they continue the quantitative easing, all it does is increase the liquidity of the big banks, but it doesn't do anything about their solvency. They're insolvent. And so you can pump 85 billion or 100 billion or a trillion a month to these banks, and they're still going to be insolvent. But meanwhile, the currency is being destroyed. Or if you taper, then you might end up with a run on the banks. Now, this is where the bail-in policy is so important. Under Dodd-Frank, Title II of Dodd-Frank, there's an agreement that the banks can seize deposits, that they're allowed to do that. And this is a huge issue in Europe because of what happened in Cyprus. This is actually the official stated policy of the European Central Bank, but they recognize the weakness of it, which is that if everyone realizes that their deposits are no longer safe, why would people put money in the banks? And so they're caught between losing the liquidity which is the only thing that's keeping them open, or going to a complete and total police state where you're going to have opposition and rebellion. So I think the good news is that the establishment is so crazy and so devoid of any alternatives that whatever they do is going to increase the opposition. The question is, can we get an organized opposition with solutions to the crisis, or will it just be chaotic? In which case, as you're saying, a collapse in itself doesn't mean a good solution will come out. A collapse could be used to impose the most brutal kind of police state.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about 2014 and our hopes for the future. I'm going to lay out a couple of mine, and at the forefront would be the arrest of Barack Obama for his crimes against the Constitution and the people of this country, his crimes against the military, his crimes against the rule of law. That would be my hope, number one, because as much as you guys have been pushing for and my hat's off to you for all the work you've done on Glass-Steagall and trying to get that re-implemented. But, we have a Congress with a, 7% approval rating. These people don't care. They're not going to do the right thing, Harley. Some of them will, most of them won't. So I think it's time to get real serious. We need to arrest Barack Obama for his crimes against the Constitution. And nothing would make me happier than to see some of these international figureheads, too, these absolute rogue criminals like George Soros arrested. George Soros is a guy behind Move On. He's behind the TPP, the UN Treaty for Gun Grabbing. Right. He loves austerity. He loves Obamacare. He hates everything good about this country and loves everything bad for humanity, as far as I can tell. So let's arrest guys like George Soros. Let's arrest Barack Obama, and let's have
Tony
a return
Blair.
to the Constitution.
Put
Tony Blair.
Put Tony Blair on that list.
And Rumsfeld and all the neocons. I don't know. I mean, that's pie in the sky thinking to the degree that, that it would happen. Although I hear guys like Jim Garrow and Dave Hodges have this conversation. And I know that folks in the military are having this conversation. And I know that Barack Obama is gutting the military at the highest levels. Anybody that won't follow his unconstitutional orders is being forced into retirement or fired. So I know these terrible things are happening, and I know that good men and women who are honorable are having these conversations. So I guess it's my prayer that with God's help, something really drastic and amazing happens that's good for this country in the near future, and I think it starts with the arrest of Barack Obama.
Well, Sean, one of the things on that is that if you go back to Syria again as a turning point, Obama was using this red line and chemical weapons as the excuse for escalating a new war. And in the intelligence community, the word went out that they would come out publicly in opposition to these reports if Obama tried to pursue it. So in other words, Clapper and the people who, and Brennan at the CIA, who are the ones who were most rabid. Brennan's basically a Saudi agent, Muslim Brotherhood agent. But they were undercut by their lower level people. You look at Snowden in this light. I think Snowden has emerged as a real hero. Yeah. And what he said in his interview with the Washington Post last week is very important. He said he doesn't have his allegiance to this government, but to the Constitution. Mm-hmm. And I think there are a lot of people in government, and I don't mean career, about people, some people in career who know that the train has gone off the rails. But people are terrified by losing pensions, losing security, getting arrested. And so when someone stands up against this, it gives others courage. Yeah. And you look at the 7% rating in Congress, even that is highly overrated. I mean, I read somewhere where toe fungus has a higher rating than the Congress. Now, how do you change that? This is where there has to be a revolution in thinking in the American people. And we've seen moments of that. We saw it around the brief upsurge in Ron Paul's campaign, for example, in the Republican Party, the rejection of the establishment and business as usual. We saw it in the reaction against the bailout, in the reaction against Obamacare, and especially in the reaction to the potential war in Syria. Now, we have to have a sustained mobilization of a persistent opposition, which would then encourage people who are in a position to do so to move against Obama, to move against this fascist austerity regime. And I think we're much closer to having something like that than most people think. The anger is there in the population. The reason Glass-Steagall is so important is that it would mean that we would be putting a wall in the banking system against speculation, which would bankrupt the too big to fail banks because they could never get any suckers to buy those financial instruments if they didn't have a Federal Reserve bailout. So we have to bankrupt Wall Street. That's the real issue because Wall Street is the power behind the Obama would-be dictatorship. It's the power behind the NSA, behind drones, behind Obamacare. And if we could communicate to people that what Obama represents is a collection point of all that's evil, the control of these financial dictators, that the way of fighting it is to use our Constitution and scare the hell out of the better people in Congress so they have to start moving. I think we're much closer toward having that kind of thought revolution in the United States, a thinking revolution that would enable us to break the pessimism and cynicism that otherwise leads good people to do nothing.
Yeah, you know what? I think it's happening, and I want to cite an example of it. I think that this thinking change is happening, and it's going to happen demographically. Here's my point. When we talk about bail-ins, and we talk about this greatest generation who really has allowed all of this to happen under their watch, right? You can blame guys like Rumsfeld, you can blame guys like Cheney, you can blame guys like Obama, but at the end of the day, you got people driving around with Obama stickers and Bush-Cheney stickers on their car.
Right.
A lot of them are an older generation than the one I am, and certainly older than the younger generation listening to the Joe Rogan podcast, which is one I listen to. Joe Rogan's a comedian, Harley. Pretty funny guy. He gets 12 million downloads a month on his podcast. Very popular guy. A lot of YouTube videos with things he said about a revolution in thinking. And people have set pictures to his rants about freedom and about thinking differently and about throwing off these old guards. And I was listening to one of the podcasts with Joe and his guests, Duncan, some others, and they were talking about Time's 2013 Person of the Year, which was the Pope. And the runner-up was Edward Snowden. And they all thought it was ludicrous. And it is ludicrous because Edward Snowden is the one that the younger generation is responding to.
That's
Edward
right.
Snowden is the one that's setting the example. Edward Snowden is the one that's standing up to this beastly system and saying no. And I just heard an interview with Edward Snowden recently where he said, I did this not because I wanted to destroy this system, but because I wanted to give the people the opportunity to recognize what's going on and decide if they want to change the system.
And that's an important point because I don't know if you saw the interview with Greenwald, but he said, if you have this kind of surveillance state, no one will be creative because people will be afraid of saying something that goes outside of acceptable thinking.
Yeah.
And he said, then you destroy the future.
Yeah. Well, that's just it. My point on the bail-ins is that the people who have allowed this system to get this out of control, the people who have benefited from it, from the Social Security and from the pensions and from everything they don't want to give up, so they don't want to see this collapse, those are the people who aren't going to necessarily fight it, whereas this younger generation who has nothing invested in this system, who's already turning to Bitcoin and silver and gold in physical form and wants nothing to do with Wall Street and wants nothing to do with this criminal system, demographically, they're going to win.
Well, I met with some people in Europe who are younger people who are fighting against the system and who actually have the same kind of sense that they have nothing to lose. They've already lost everything. You know, if you think about 50% or higher youth unemployment in Spain and Greece, and then you look at the United States, what's the situation with college graduates? How many of them have had to move back in with their parents who can't get jobs or they get temporary jobs or part-time jobs? We have a situation where the only thing that's missing is solutions and leadership. And I think that the key thing, what we're doing with LaRouchePAC, we're running a campaign in Texas for the U.S. Senate in the Democratic Party with Keisha Rogers, who's twice won the nomination for Democratic congressional race in the 22nd District by saying we have to get rid of Obama. She's an African-American Democrat calling for the impeachment of Obama. I think we can shake things up with things that go outside of the accepted political discussion, because the accepted political discussion is death and brain deadness. And I think that's what Snowden showed. that you can still survive by breaking with the system.
Yeah. And he's laid this system absolutely bare. He's absolutely exposed it for its fraudulent lack of supporting liberty and its fraudulent lack of love for humanity and its complete fraud because, when CNN calls out guys like Peter King, a complete avowed Zionist, to malign Edward Snowden and call for his arrest and malign Rand Paul and malign anybody that would stand up against this system, it's laid bare. Everybody knows that Edward Snowden did the honorable thing. So when they roll out guys like Zionist Peter King, it's evident to everybody that the emperor wears no clothes. And that is why CNN's viewership is at an all-time low. That's why CNN is going to close up shop and they don't even want to do news anymore. They want to move towards infotainment because they've lost the battle. They've lost the hearts and minds of the young people, Harley. And that was my point. Your point being that college kids get out with these student loans and there's no jobs available. That's what I'm saying. They have nothing vested in this criminal system anymore.
Exactly. And I'll just add one other point to that. The biggest demographic sector that reelected Obama was the 18 to 30-year-olds. That is, in 2012, he got 60+% of the vote from that grouping. Now he's down at about 29% in the polls in that. And what changed? Snowden. People who live with social networking and the sense that they have some option outside of the system now find out that that option they had is controlled. And they're rebelling. They're angry. And I really do think, as someone who's always tried to work with young people and give them ideas and a sense of the real history, the positive history of this country, if you think about it, if you were born after 1990, what's your experience? It's Clinton, Bush, and Obama.
Mm-hmm.
You have no sense of the United States as a positive force in the world, as a productive force, as having a commitment to uplifting every person. Instead, you basically are a wage slave or a credit card debt slave. And so to give them a sense of optimism and a sense of courage that Snowden stood up and fought. And we haven't seen, I don't think yet, the full reaction to this that we're going to get. So I think let me put it this way. As someone who's been in this business for a long time, I think I can see an outcome in 2014 that will be so dramatically different from the close of 2013 that we've just got to keep putting forward the truth and alternatives. And I think that this is the time where we can have that kind of change.
Well, that is an inspirational way, I think, to end the call, because in 2014, all we can do, as I said at the beginning of the interview, God willing, that there will be a return to rule of law and liberty in this land, and it has to start with people disengaging from this system and no longer agreeing to take part in it. My friend Chris Duane says that all the time. The only way that you can stop this system is by not taking part in it, by removing yourself from the system, because the system needs your consent.
Your submission.
It needs your submission, even better than consent. You're right. You need to submit to the authority of this evil system.
Exactly, and that you submit to the idea that you can't change it. And once you accept the idea that you can't change it, you have no future.
Well, I guess that's where we'll end it, and we'll end it on this note that Edward Snowden really did show us that one person, and we know this to be true, but there isn't a better recent example that I can think of than Edward Snowden, that one person can truly make a difference. One person can change the world by standing up, speaking truth to power. It's very inspirational.
That it is, and that's a good role model for us for the coming year.
So, Harley, are you back from Europe?
Yeah, we got back on Friday, and ironically, we were almost not able to come back because one of the reasons we went to Austria was to get official documents changing my wife's name to my name and our daughter's name to my name. But the problem is that we don't have U.S. documents with my daughter's name, even though she's a U.S. citizen. So they were almost not going to let us fly because I bought the ticket in the name Schlanger. But her U.S. identification is under her mother's maiden name. And so we had to get the U.S. consulate to intervene to override the stupid anti-terror laws that would have stopped a 25-month-old child from entering the country.
Well, we're glad you made it back safely, Harley. And who knows, if things don't improve in this country soon, you may want to go back and just decide to live in Austria permanently.
Well, the problem with Austria is that whereas Germany goes, so goes Austria. And Germany is, at least in terms of its political leadership, the coalition government of the CDU and the SPD is a puppet of the British Empire and fascist policy. So I think we got to win the fight here.
All right, Harley. Well, thank you so much for your time. We surely do appreciate it. As always, you guys can check out Harley's work and the work of the great folks over at LaRouche at LaRouchePAC.com. Harley, I know sometimes you offer to have people email you if they have any questions or want to get involved in helping take our Constitution and our Bill of Rights back.
Sure, I have responded quite a bit to. I've had email correspondence from your listeners that was quite extensive after the last interview. So if anyone wants to get in touch with me personally, you can send an email to me at harleysch@gmail.com. And it may take me a couple of days, but I'll get back to you. And, I found some highly committed, serious people have taken up that offer. So please do. If you really want to do something, get in touch with me.
Yeah, we have some wonderful people on our side, and we know that. A lot of our regular commenters are just really wonderful, driven people, and we appreciate all you guys. So I want to wish everybody a very happy New Year. Harley, you are ringing in the New Year with us. I think this will be the interview that goes up here on Sunday and stays up right through the New Year. So thank you again for your time, and I wish you a happy New Year, sir.
Okay, same to you, Sean. Thank you very much.
Talk to you soon. Thanks, guys. We sure do appreciate you tuning in to sgtreport.com on a daily basis for real news. Please do check out LaRouchePAC.com to see what the LaRouche folks are up to, and check out thelibertymill.com for real news 24/7, 365. Happy New Year. We love you. Bye-bye.